All right, so I wanted to briefly talk about this chapter, Hacker Heretics and Intertextuality in Video Games and English Language Arts by one Hannah R. Gerber. So I know a lot of you are active gamers. Some of you may not be. But it seems like everyone's at least interested in the possibility, right, of using games in the classroom. Is there some way we can tap into all the excitement and interest in games and apply that to learning? Of course, there's a whole movement called gamification or gamification that looks not just at using games in educational contexts, but games in business. How can you improve productivity in the workplace? Make it more game-like. And I'll just rattle off some books here that you should read if you're interested in this topic. One is, of course, she mentions James Paul G. He's got a book called What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy. Key text, definitely read that if you're at all interested in this. There's also a book called Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal. It's a really good book. I enjoyed it. But if you want a shorter version, you can just look at her TED Talk on the topic. And then there's a bunch of books just on educational games. I've got a couple here in my office. You're welcome to come and look at those. Computer Games for Learning by Mayer is one. And several other ones here. But anyway, I would say the James Paul G and the Reality is Broken, probably the main text. Okay, so let's delve into this. I'm a little biased because, of course, I'm a huge gamer. It's kind of my thing. So this is, of course, we should be using this stuff. Maybe not literally the games, but at least trying to borrow some of their methods, right? But she wants to actually use two video games. We'll talk about it in a minute. But first, why even bother with this? Video games, isn't this what the kids do instead of doing their homework, right? So why would you actually want to encourage this at all? She's got two responses to this, right? She says, first, well, let's look at video games. They're dynamic, engaging, multimedia environments that deserve deeper exploration for how it can be employed in classroom learning. So people still tend to think, unless they're active gamers, they might still think that we're kind of stuck in a Pac-Man, a Super Mario Brothers kind of level, not be aware how far games have evolved in the meantime and how rich they can be nowadays. So that's part of it. In the same way that people have said about these other media, right? Yeah, sure, you could think about movies. A movie could be very simplistic, very dumb, very, zero redeeming qualities to it. On the other hand, it could be something like Saving Private Ryan or Schindler's List. So they're kind of all over the place. And you don't want to just paint them with a broad brush, right? Then she says, of particular interest are the collaborative and cross-disciplinary intertextual meaning-making methods that gamers employ when they engage in learning and dialogue with other gamers in game environments and increasingly when embedded in social environments. So one of the things that Gerber reminds us of here is we're not just looking at the game itself. Actually, the game itself is just really kind of only a minor part of what she wants to talk about, right? She's more interested in the community of activity, all the fan stuff, the guides, all this, she calls them paratexts, all this sort of textuality that goes around, all around the gaming experience. So I think that's, when you think about it that way, a lot of people have asked me, how would I use games in the classroom, and specifically in our first year writing class. And usually I say I wouldn't use the game like Uncharted in that context. I feel like I've got enough to do in there as it is. But the way that Gerber talks about this, I could see it. If you're going to have an assignment where people are looking at game guides, especially in a class like a writing in the profession, some type of technical writing assignment, that becomes pretty easy to see how that could be useful, right? You're still writing a technical document, but you're just talking about a game. But there's still an instructional component to it, sure. And I think what's more interesting to me was the fan fiction angle. But anyway, let's just stop here for now. So just sort of off the cuff, what do you think about using video games? Or would you consider using games in your classrooms, or would you like to have classes that used games? Okay, so she talks about this term heuretics, and it's sort of a strange term. Hackers, of course, we talked about this before. We're not talking about these hackers that have hacked it, like the people holding hospitals for ransom. Nothing like that. What we want to talk about instead is the idea that when you're talking about software, um, you should have the option to change how that software works to suit your own purposes, right? A lot of software has options in there where you can alter settings, but some software you can actually get in there and change up some fundamental ways about how the program works, right? They call that modding. So she talks here about hacker heuretics as inventing new forms and practices through a gamer's playful interactions or interventions with the medium to help create and shape the digital tools that are being used and played with on a daily basis. They allow the gamer to shape and change the user experience for others by relying on changing part of the structure of gameplay. Uh, I see this more on the PC and maybe Mac gaming side. If you go to a service like Steam, for example, they have all these workshop. I think it's called the Steam Workshop or something like that, where people could take a game like, let's just say some XCOM, one that I played recently, and they can create mods for it. So basically, maybe suddenly you have the option to play with Ewoks, change up the costumes of the characters. Other times they can add a whole new level, whole new part of the story, new characters. It's just kind of up to the designer or developer of the game to decide what they want to allow. But part of the fun of doing this for these modders, though, is that they can share these things back with the other gamers. And there's kind of a little bit of a popularity aspect to it, right? If you have a really good mod and everybody installs that, then it's very satisfying. I haven't really done any of these, but I have worked some on the what she talks about later, these paratexts. But anyway, let's just talk about the hacker heuretics for now, modding and hacking. So she really doesn't talk about this part so much, but I was thinking about assignments. And, what if you sort of had options when you're making a writing prompt, for example, where students could basically mod your assignment somehow to bring in some creativity and shape it. Because I think that's one of the things we struggle with as teachers, right? The students tend to want clarity, and they want to know exactly what you want them to do. But on the other hand, you want to leave some room for originality and creativity. You don't want just basically have students connect the dots, right? You want them to have a little more latitude. So I thought maybe this hacker heretics, to me, sounds like maybe that would be a place where you could allow some more latitude with your assignments, but not quite sure. Okay, then she talks about the ties to English language arts. So again, thinking about, okay, you can use games in certain classes, sure, but writing, you play these games with a gamepad or a mouse, not a lot of writing involved. So what about that? And this is the problem I always run into. So she's got a couple of solutions. She brings in, I think it's James Paul G, again, this constellation of connections, gamers interacting across modalities and to construct meaning among literacy events, fostering cross-literate connections. So it sounds like she's almost got this sort of rhizomatic view, right? But really, I think what it comes down to is these gamers are getting the information they need to play the game well from all kinds of sources, and they're also not just receiving the information, but they're also putting information out there. And again, all kinds of different modalities. And most of these definitions, student learning outcomes, the Husky Compact is a good example. Almost anything like that you read stresses that we don't want people just to learn one medium, right? So we want them to be doing more than just reading and writing. We want to have all these other modalities in play. And it seems like gamers are already quite comfortable with this. So maybe we can learn from that. She also talks about meta-mediating, interweaving multiple communicative acts simultaneously while also engaging in intertextual meaning making. So you see this, I think, most clearly if you play an online game where you're playing on a team. A lot of students do this nowadays, and if you watch them do it or listen to them do it, you realize they're playing the game and they're moving around in there, but they're probably talking to their teammates on a headset, maybe also typing out things. Some of the games within the game you can do things like wave or signal. Uh, there's also mods that people create to help them communicate. Sort of, here's what my character is doing. You need to be aware of this so you can act accordingly. So there's some very complex communication going on. So that's a connection to English language arts, right? And I think probably the easiest part to apply those where she talks about paratexts, texts that surround and support the main text. So some of these are writing. So again, if you're thinking about a first year comp class like English 191, and you're talking about a game wiki, well, that game wiki will probably mostly be text. Once you're in the world of text and writing, then it's pretty obvious how it could be relevant to a writing course. The same thing with fan fiction. So that would be one way I think you could bring games into the class. So she says you can connect it via actions, designs, situations, and systems. So they see a lot of connections here. But I just want to pause here to ask you, what do you see as the connections to English language arts? Do you agree with these points? Did you find other points? Now she talks about two examples of games that she's used before, and she says that there's millions of games out there. I get millions, well maybe, but anyway, lots of choices. So don't feel like you're stuck with these. But she talks about Uncharted and Elder Scrolls. Uncharted, again, I don't know if you're familiar with these games or not, but she really liked the sort of elaborate narrative of Uncharted and all the characters and everything. My problem with that choice is as far as I know, it's exclusive to the PlayStation. What is it? I think it started on PS3, maybe PS4. But anyway, it seemed like there would be sort of a technical problem with having that game because people would have to have this particular console to play it. But with that aside, I think the assignment holds up fairly well. That's the one where she wants to talk about a point of view, and there's kind of a fan fiction aspect to it. The other one was Elder Scrolls, which and what she said before, the Elder Scrolls makes a lot more sense to me to talk about that game instead, because that does have a rich modding community. People have made all kinds of little changes and to add new options, new content to the game. There is a lot of text in that game as well. You actually find books when you're playing the game. And it wouldn't be too hard for me to imagine a teacher really just running away with this concept, right, and putting a lot of the content from their course into an Elder Scrolls mod of some sort. But anyway, I just wonder here, what do you think about these game choices? Would you use these same games if it was you, or would you suggest others? It's kind of like to know that. And a couple of key concerns that she talked about that I wanted to mention as well. This first one in particular struck me. So she says, don't co-opt and strip the enjoyment from the video game in question. So we've talked about this danger before, something I've experienced firsthand, and you might have as well. You take something everybody loves, or at least you love, let's say Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that's kind of stuck in my memory now. So you might love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, maybe the students like it, but once you bring it into the class and you kind of have them have to do all kinds of assignments around it, that can sort of dull somebody's enthusiasm for it. Once it's something that you have to watch for homework versus something that you just choose to watch because you think it's fun, that can take away somehow. It's kind of, I don't know why exactly, but it seems to take away a lot of the enjoyment, and that's terrible to think about. If a student really loves something and now they hate it because it was brought into a classroom against their will. And plus, it's kind of almost an invasion, right? I mean, this is something the students doing outside of school. Now you're trying to sort of bring it, appropriate it. So there's kind of weird issues around this. But for that reason, and she said too, and that's something I think was important again from that Rancière Jacques piece or a book. We talked about this as well when what if the students have never played Uncharted, never played Elder Scrolls, have no idea what that is, then trying to use those games as an assignment, suddenly there's no, is it, why even bringing it in? It's just as strange to them in that case as it would be to bring in traditional literature, right? So she does say, and I think quite wisely, that if the students, maybe they haven't played these games, but they're familiar with similar games, why not just let them do the same thing with those other games, even if the teacher is not necessarily familiar with it. So that's a good point. And then she also talked about initiative fatigue, which I thought this was interesting. So, I enjoy, whenever I hear about some new software, some new app, I love that stuff. I want to know what it is. I want to play around with it. I don't know. I guess I'm just weird that way. I think it's fun. But I can certainly appreciate someone who feels like, oh, here's another thing they're pushing, like kind of shoving down our throats right now. We've got to use this software package, this new assessment tool, the Husky Compact, whatever. And it's true that people have to justify a paycheck, right? So they can't just say, well, we're going to use all the same stuff we've been using for years. They wouldn't get paid good money to do that, right? They get hired because they've got some exciting new initiative, and this is going to revolutionize, release the streamline, yada yada, right? With the teachers, even if it's almost like the students lose their love for the game because it's brought into the classroom. It almost sounds like these teachers kind of lose their interest in being innovative because it's forced on them rather than something they got to look for and find out. I was thinking about this in terms of this whole book that we were reading, Yin and Yang, in each classroom. Part of the fun for me, and I think for you too, would be that instead of, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, remember that chapter? It'd be one thing if you read that chapter and you thought, this sounds pretty cool. I would love to use a Buffy in my classroom, and this article is giving me some ideas on how to do that. So I think that would be one thing. Be something quite different, though, if I was in a position to say, okay, you will use this. Your course will be about Buffy, whether you like it or not. This is the mandate. So I see, even though these are kind of different concerns, I see kind of a similarity between these two. It's like the teachers and the students are kind of in the same situation if they're not allowed that freedom to choose. And also thinking about the second one too, maybe the goal of the Yin and Yang book should be not to find things that you would use directly, but to kind of inspire you as to sort of what's possible, and maybe try to think of some kind of a pop culture. It could be a video game, film, show, whatever, that hasn't been used before. But maybe for that fact, it would be kind of fun for you, and you wouldn't be have to worry about initiative fatigue, right? You'd be more of a voyage of discovery. Okay, I think that about all I wanted to say about this. We've kind of covered some of this ground before in other articles, but I hope that you enjoyed this. Maybe it got you to think a little more. And I did like the fact that this author did take into consideration these two aspects. What if the students don't like the game? They should have another activity. I mean, how many of these other writers have had that kind of a disclaimer that sort of say, yeah, give them another option if they don't want to play a game? It would have been nice for those other ones too. Like, well, what if they hate Buffy? Maybe, they should have another option. So I like those ideas. But anyway, I'll leave it there. And as always, I want to know what you think. If there's anything that you wanted to add to this that I didn't get to, just let me know. And I'll see you next time.